Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The afternoon was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you hear every creak of the house. I was in the laundry room, folding warm towels fresh from the dryer, enjoying the soft heat against my hands. The rhythm of folding had become almost meditative. One of the rare pockets of peace I found in my day. My husband Daniel was working late again. He always was these days. He said it was the busy season, though it felt like that season never ended. Our marriage had been not broken, exactly, but worn down like a shirt that had been washed too many times, the fabric thinning at the seams. I was halfway through a stack of shirts when I heard the soft patter of footsteps in the hall. My son, Evan, came into the room, his hair messy from a nap. He was only 7, but his eyes carried a wisdom that often caught me off guard. "Mom," he said quietly, "there's a man at the door. He says he knows you." The words caught me off balance. I wasn't expecting anyone. I set the shirt down and wiped my hands on my jeans. "What's his name?" I asked. He said, "His name is Noah." My breath hitched. Noah, I hadn't heard that name in years, yet it still carried the weight of every memory I'd tried to bury. He had been my closest friend. No, more than that, long before I met Daniel. Back when I was 22 and still figuring out who I was, Noah had been my confidant, my safe place, my almost love. But we'd walked away from each other, for reasons that made sense back then. At least, that's what I told myself. I walked to the front door, my hands slightly trembling. And there he was. Older, yes, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, hair a little darker from rain, but still unmistakably Noah. "Hi," he said softly, almost like a question. "I was in town. Thought I'd take a chance." We stood there, the air thick with unspoken history. I invited him in, telling myself it was just for a cup of tea, just to catch up. But the moment our eyes met again, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. We sat at the kitchen table, the rain tapping against the windows. We talked about work, life, the little things, but there was an undercurrent, a pull neither of us acknowledged. His gaze would linger a little too long. My laugh came a little too easily. At one point, I reached for the sugar bowl and his hand brushed mine. It was such a small touch, but it ignited something deep in me. A warmth I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, I was 22 again, and every wall I'd built around my heart felt dangerously thin. "I've missed you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. My mind was screaming with reasons to pull away, to tell him this was wrong. But my heart was remembering how it felt to be truly seen. When I finally looked up at him, I realized he already knew my answer. The sound of the rain seemed to wrap around us as we sat there, as if the world outside had blurred into nothing but this small kitchen. Noah's presence filled every inch of space, not because he was loud or overbearing, but because he had always known how to be steady, present, quietly intense. I hadn't realized until this moment how starved I'd been for that kind of attention. Daniel loved me. I knew that. But lately, his love felt distracted, distant. With Noah, even after all these years, it felt like I was the only thing in his line of sight. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his travels, how his work had taken him to places he'd once only dreamed of. I told him about Evan, about the house, about the little life I'd built. But under every word was the weight of what we weren't saying. The years we'd spent apart, the questions we never answered, the lingering, what if? At one point, Evan patted in, still sleepy, clutching his stuffed fox. "Is he staying for dinner?" he asked, looking at Noah with curious eyes. I hesitated. "I don't know," I said with a small smile. Noah's gaze softened as he looked at Ivana. "If your mom wants me to," he said gently. There was something almost dangerous in that offer, because I knew he wasn't just talking about dinner. After Evan went back to his room to play, the silence between us stretched, charged and heavy. My hand toyed with the rim of my teacup. "You should probably tell me why you're really here," I said finally. Noah leaned back, studying me. "Because I never stopped thinking about you," he said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "Not once. I don't care if it's been a decade. I see you, and it all comes back." I felt my breath catch. My instinct was to push away, to remind him and myself that I was married, that life had moved on. But something in me was tired of pretending that I didn't miss this him. The clock ticked quietly on the wall. Somewhere down the hall, Evan's laughter drifted through, innocent and light. The sound grounded me, reminded me of the reality of my life. But when Noah's hand slid across the table and covered mine, reality shifted. His touch was warm, steady. It wasn't rushed, wasn't demanding. It was the kind of touch that simply said, "I'm here. You're going to make this hard," I whispered, my voice shaking. He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "It's already hard. I just couldn't go another year without seeing your face." The storm outside deepened, the rain turning into a heavy downpour. The room felt smaller, safer, as if the weather was giving us permission to linger. "Stay." "For dinner?" I said suddenly, my voice firmer than I expected. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "If that's what you want." But the truth was, I wasn't just inviting him to dinner. I was inviting him back into my life, even if only for a night. We cooked together, something I hadn't done with anyone in years. He chopped vegetables while I stirred the pot, and every time our hands brushed, a quiet current ran through me. He teased me about my cooking skills, just like he used to, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. Evan loved him instantly, asking him questions about where he'd been and what he'd seen. Noah answered every one, his voice full of warmth. I watched him from across the table, wondering what my life might have looked like if things had gone differently. When the evening wound down and Evan was in bed, the house fell into a hush. We stood in the kitchen, the only light coming from the small lamp over the sink. My hands were damp from rinsing dishes, my heart pounding from something I didn't want to name. Noah stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of rain on his clothes. "I should go," he murmured. "Maybe," I said softly, not moving away. We stood there, neither of us speaking, the rain filling the silence. His eyes searched mine, as if asking a question he didn't dare speak aloud. And in that moment, I knew I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't undo. Noah's eyes held mine for a long moment, and I could feel the war going on inside me. The battle between the safe life I had and the pull of what I'd once felt for him. "You look the same," he said quietly, except stronger somehow. That caught me off guard. "Stronger?" "Yeah," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Like you've been through things, but you've carried them. You didn't let them crush you." The way he said it made me want to both laugh and cry. I'd spent years keeping parts of myself locked away, and yet here was someone who could see through all of it in a single glance. "You always did talk. Like you could read my mind," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "Maybe I still can," he replied. There was a pause, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but full. Full of memories, unspoken words, the ghosts of almosts. I turned to put the last plate in the dish rack, my back to him, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. But before I could reach for the towel, I felt him step closer, his presence a quiet force behind me. "You've been happy?" he asked. I hesitated. "Mostly." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Marriage had been steady, familiar, but it hadn't been alive. Not in the way it used to feel when I was younger and believed love could set your skin. His voice was low, almost cautious. "And now?" I turned then, leaning back against the counter, meeting his eyes. "Now?" "I don't know." The air between us felt heavier, the space shrinking. He didn't move to touch me, but his nearness alone was enough to make my breath shallow. Double quotes Noah. I whispered, though I didn't know if it was a warning or a plea. "I'm not here to ruin anything." he said, but his gaze never left mine. I just couldn't stay away any longer. Something about the way he said it made my heart ache. It wasn't just longing, it was regret, maybe even love that had never faded. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, the kind that rattled the windows. The storm had settled over the house like a blanket, making everything feel more intimate. As though we were the only two people left in the world. When the power flickered and went out, we both froze for a second before laughing softly at the same time. I lit a candle from the drawer, setting it on the table. Its warm light painted the room in gold and shadow, and in that glow, Noah looked different, softer, more vulnerable. "Do you remember that night on the pier?" he asked suddenly. Of course I did. It had been years ago, before life got complicated. We'd sat there until dawn, our hands linked, talking about everything we wanted to do and be. Back then, the world had felt like it was ours. "I remember," I said. His smile was faint, almost sad. "I've thought about it 100 times. Since?" We fell into quiet again, but this time it wasn't comfortable. It was taut, pulling us closer whether we meant it or not. My mind told me to keep my distance, but my heart was already leaning in. When Noah finally reached for my hand, his fingers brushed mine so lightly I could have pulled away without effort. But I didn't. The contact was small, innocent even, but it felt like a spark had caught between us. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened, in the way my pulse picked up. "Noah," I began, but he shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Don't ruin this with words." And so I stayed silent, letting the moment stretch, letting his presence wash over me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing with startling clarity. I wasn't ready for him to leave. The candle between us flickered, its flame swaying as though it could feel the pulse in the room. I didn't move my hand from Noah's, not when the thunder cracked again, not when the rain began to hit the windows harder. His thumb traced slow, absent circles over my skin, the kind of small gesture that shouldn't mean anything, but somehow unraveled every careful knot I tied around my heart. He leaned back slightly, his eyes locked on mine. "You always hated storms," he murmured. "I still do," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "Back then, I used to tell you they were just the sky's way of reminding us we weren't in control." I remembered. I also remembered that those nights, he'd wrap me in his jacket and we'd sit somewhere safe, waiting it out. Now, standing in the soft glow of the candle, I felt like the storm wasn't outside. It was here, in this kitchen, swirling around us. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered, though even as I said it, my voice was softer than my words. "Tell me to leave," he said simply. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to go. I didn't want this moment to end, even though I knew it couldn't last. He must have seen the answer in my eyes, because he stepped just a fraction closer. Not enough to be inappropriate, but enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. My breath caught, and I hated how much he noticed. "Do you ever think about you?" "See?" he asked quietly. My heart twisted. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Sometimes? More than I should," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes softened. I never stopped. That was dangerous, too dangerous. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, pulling my hand back and turning to fuss with the towel on the counter. But Noah didn't press. He just watched me, as if committing every movement to memory. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt weighted with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, I spoke. "I have a life, Noah, a marriage. I'm not asking you to," he cut in gently. "I just needed to see you, to remember that the way I felt wasn't something I made up." I swallowed hard. And what if it wasn't? What if it's still there? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to stand by the window, staring out into the dark. The storm outside was relentless, but the stillness in the kitchen felt even louder. "I'd say that's the problem," he said finally, turning to face me again. Something in me shifted then. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his voice, or maybe it was the fact that I'd spent years convincing myself I didn't need this kind of connection anymore. I took a slow step toward him. Then another. When I stopped, we were close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, close enough to feel his breath against my skin. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know what this is," I said softly. "You do," he murmured, his hand lifted, almost hesitantly, brushing a loose strand of hair away from my face. That small touch undid me more than any kiss could have. The storm raged on, but all I could feel was him, the weight of his gaze, the quiet steadiness of his presence. And for the first time in years, I let myself lean into it. Neither of us moved for a long time. The kitchen felt smaller than it had minutes ago, as though the space between us had been pulled taut, stretched thin, and fragile. Every sound outside, the rain, the distant roll of thunder, seemed to fade until all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I broke eye contact first, stepping back under the pretense of checking the clock above the stove. It was nearly 10 p.m. My husband wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. I hated that my brain even thought about that, calculating windows of time. "Noah," I began, but my voice caught on his name. He leaned his elbows on the counter, watching me like he used like I was something worth studying. "Do you want me to go?" I should have said yes. The answer was simple, obvious. But my silence was louder than any refusal, and we both knew it. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't the easy grin I remembered. It was sad, cautious. "Do you remember the cabin by the lake?" Of course I did. We'd gone there with friends years ago, before my marriage, before his life had taken him to another city. There had been a night when the two of us stayed up late on the porch, wrapped in blankets, talking until the sun came up. That had been the first time I'd wondered what it might feel like to kiss him. "I remember," I said, my voice quiet. "You told me that night you felt safe with me," he said. "I've thought about that ever since." The words pressed against something inside me that I'd tried to bury. "I did feel safe," I admitted. "Maybe too safe?" He tilted his head. "Slightly. Too safe to let anything happen?" I looked down, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "No, too safe to admit I wanted something too." That pulled a sharp breath from him, and for a moment I thought he might close the space between. "You's right then." But instead he straightened, his gaze sweeping over me like he was trying to memorize every detail. "I didn't come here to ruin anything for you," he said. "I just couldn't go another year wondering if what I felt was one-sided." "It wasn't," I said before I could stop myself. The truth was, I'd thought about Noah more times than I could count. In the quiet moments when my marriage felt like an obligation instead of a choice, when my days blurred into routines and my nights into silence. He'd been the what if I never admitted out loud dot, and now he was standing in my kitchen, with the storm wrapping the house in a cocoon of sound. And the what if didn't feel so distant anymore. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate. "Tell me you don't feel it right now, and I'll walk out." My throat tightened. I should have lied. But my silence was all the answer he needed. The air between us shifted. His hand reached up again, brushing that same strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering just a second longer than it needed to. My skin warmed beneath it, a pull in my chest I couldn't ignore. When his fingers trailed lightly down the side of my cheek, I closed my eyes. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it felt like one in every way that mattered. The storm outside cracked louder, and in its echo, I whispered, "I've missed you." His voice was rough when he answered, "You have no idea." And then, finally, the years of restraint between us began to dissolve. The thunder rolled again, low and distant this time, but the sound seemed to vibrate through the kitchen walls. Noah's hand stayed at my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly. against my skin as though he was afraid I might disappear if he touched me too firmly. I didn't step away. I couldn't. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, even as I leaned into his palm. I know, he said softly, but I've imagined this for years. My heart was pounding hard enough I could feel it in my fingertips. The smell of rain drifted in through the slightly open window, and the room felt smaller, the space between us narrowing to nothing. When his other hand found my waist, it wasn't rushed. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of touch that said he was memorizing the shape of me all over again. My breath caught as he drew me closer, until there was no space left to pretend. We didn't speak for a moment. We just stood there, the storm filling the silence, our breaths mingling. My hands rose on their own, sliding over the soft fabric of his shirt until my fingers rested at the base of his neck. He leaned in, but not enough to close the distance. Instead, he hovered just close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath on my lips. If I kiss you, he murmured, I won't want to stop. I don't want you to, I answered before my mind could argue. That was all it took. His lips found mine with a heat that made my knees weaken, the years of unspoken longing between us pouring out in that first kiss. It wasn't tentative. It was hungry, desperate, like we'd both been holding our breath for far too long and finally let it out in each other. His hand slid up my back, pulling me against him as if he needed to feel every inch of me. My fingers tangled in his hair and the kiss deepened, each movement slower but more intense, each one carrying the weight of years spent apart. When we finally broke for air, his forehead rested against mine. God, you're even more than I remembered, he breathed. The world outside blurred. The rain, the storm, the thought of my husband returning, all of it felt far away. There was only Noah, and the way his touch made me feel alive again. In a way I hadn't in years. He trailed soft, deliberate kisses along my jaw, down the side of my neck, each one sending a shiver through me. Tell me to stop, he murmured again, his voice breaking on the words. I can't, I whispered, my hands gripping the back of his shirt as though letting go would undo everything. And in that kitchen, with the storm wrapping the house in a cocoon of sound, we gave into the pull that had been years in the making. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was deep, unhurried, and filled with a passion that came from knowing we were both crossing a line and not caring anymore. Every touch was an admission, every kiss a confession of everything we'd never said out loud. When it was over, the rain had softened, the storm passing into the distance. But nothing between us felt the same. His hands stayed in mine longer than it should have, his eyes holding mine like he wasn't ready to let go, like maybe he never would be. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, reminding me how late it had gotten. I pulled back slightly, my hands still pressed to Noah's chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart beneath my palms. He searched my face like he was trying to memorize it. Every line, every shadow, every trace of me he could carry with him. After tonight, I don't know what happens now, he admitted quietly. Neither do I whispered, my voice shaking. But I know I'm not ready for this to end. His hand slid down my arm, fingers lacing with mine. Then don't let it, he said, his tone low but certain. We didn't make promises, not the kind that would fall apart in daylight. Instead, he pulled me into one last kiss, slow and lingering, the kind you feel in your chest long after it's over. It was full of everything we couldn't say. A quiet vow neither of us dared to speak aloud. When he finally let go, the air between us still buzzed, like the echo of lightning. After it struck, I watched him leave through the back door, his figure disappearing into the misty night, the sound of the rain fading with him. I stood alone in the kitchen, my lips still tingling, my pulse still racing. I knew life would demand its explanations. Come morning, that reality would press in hard and cold. But for now, I held on to the memory, the storm, his touch, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And deep down, I knew that no matter what, happened next, nothing would ever erase the night I let Noah back in.